In this episode, Doc Block dives into the realm of anthuriums. He shares his breeding goals, including the traits he's looking for and why you should grow one. We then take a look at some amazing anthuriums residing in his small breeding facility. If you missed the previous episode, Doc Block showcases his beautiful Florida garden and imparts a wonderful philosophy on plant collecting.
So, Dr. Block, what are some of your traits that you like in your hybrids, and do you have an end goal in mind?
Well, when I started working with velvet-leafed anthuriums, basically everything was green. Some had silver stripes and veining, but I see the world through color. So if you look even here, what's in front of me, whether it's this color, the vein pattern in them, or even the back of a leaf, where when I see this, I think of blood circulating through a body. So it had certainly an analogy to humans. And then the veins may be actually wider. And as the leaf matures, it actually changes its colors from reds and violets to browns and blacks to eventually getting to be green. Okay. But they are constantly growing. So they're constantly showing new colors with every new emergent leaf. That's one of the things that fascinated me about the hybridizing of this. So if there's anything I think I could be most associated with, it would be just that, bringing colors to velvet-leafed anthuriums. But here's the point. A good breeder does not simply select for what the plant looks like. A good breeder is going to select the most robust, vigorous growers from a seed batch, and they'll use those. Why should I want to wait for the slowpokes, the little runts of a given seed batch to develop? If you do that selection for multiple generations, you tend to select for vigor, which is as important as what the plant looks like. My goal is to have as many people in the world grow these successfully, because the fact is, a vigorous plant is easier to grow than a challenging rare exotic. So for many reasons, these plants, even compared to other aroids, such as alocaceas or colocaceas, their leaves are much more flimsy. They're much more dependent on constant hydration. Anthuriums of this kind are far more tolerant of being drying out and then watered, perhaps only twice a week as an interior houseplant. And that makes it particularly suitable for not someone's greenhouse collection like I'm fortunate to have here, but for a kitchen windowsill where most people would rather enjoy a plant. Water's right next to it, put a little water on it twice a week, and watch those colors evolve all throughout the year.
Are you breeding them for darker colors, or are you not team dark leaf?
Among other things, yes. I have, for instance, in the frontiers one with veins, and I don't know if your picture will pick that up carefully. Very clean, almost white veins, but on what appears to be an almost black leaf. The leaf starts off purple, as would Anthurium Michelle, named after my wife Michelle. But when you take purple, and think about this, and you combine purple with green, if you ever do that, look what color turns out, and it's nearly black. That's what you're seeing in that leaf.
I see.
Now that's compared to a leaf like this, which actually is more brown and actually starts off more red. Because if you start with the color red and you mix it with green, the color that you'll see evolve from when you mix those together is not black, it's brown. So you can remember, perhaps, if you ever used crayons or markers as a little kid, what happens to a color when you match it and put another color on it. Most people think of blue and yellow makes green. Well, I wanted to do things that would encourage people to see something other than green in a leaf as it evolves.
So would you say that a lot of the emergent leaf color, like reds, and also the dark leaf, they're attributed mostly to genetics and not your light levels or environment?
More genetics than anything else. However, because the plants are growing quicker in the warmer, wet seasons, in our winter time, the plants grow slower, so that the new emergent leaf, which is lasting longer before the next leaf, seems to stay in color longer. It probably does, but the whole plant metabolically is slowed down. That's why you're seeing it. And in addition to temperature, light can make a difference. Now, I tend to push more light to try to give plants excellent light because of where these plants evolved. These plants evolved at equatorial levels, meaning at the equator in Colombia, South America. I've hybridized with them. In Miami, Florida, we're at the 25th north parallel. Why do I bring that up? Because light that these plants have evolved under naturally is pretty much 12 hours on and 12 hours off all year round. So in our shorter light months, I will even supplement with extra light, and that way I get a more compact plant. And there's something to be said for a plant that's compact rather than long and leggy, if only for carrying it or the space it occupies in your kitchen. So I think light is something that people may think of this as being a jungle understory plant. And yes, they will tolerate lower light, but actually horticulturally and the way they seem to appear and appeal more to a collector is when they're grown well, compact, tight, with many leaves on the plant compared to just 2 or 3 stretched out leaves.
Is there anything more you'd like to add?
Yes, there is, Sean. I would have never met you except for the plant community that exists not only in this side of the world, but from where you're from, in Asia. And all I can say is whether my house guests who are here with me now from Thailand and Malaysia, you from Indonesia, the show next month for the first time showing my plants in China, the communities are global. And plants have a way of appealing to people, no matter what your skin color, race, sex, or political affiliation. Plants are the universal détente.
Having traveled the globe extensively, I agree that the love for growing plants connect us all. Next, DocBlock shares with us other notable physical characteristics of anthuriums that make them some of the most sought after today.
This is called a sinus.
Yes.
And some have very wide sinuses and others have sinuses like here where they meet up top.
Yeah.
So these are intermediate sinuses. And so people have different preferences for looks. Sometimes even sinuses are fused at the top. But they're all different structural elements, and some leaves of anthuriums are round and some are long. I had mentioned before about colocaceas and the leaf texture. So these are also aeroids. They grow sometimes even entirely and partially submerged in water, meaning they need a lot of water to be able to support the turgor, or how thick the leaves are.
Yeah.
Anthuriums are different. And this would be a challenging plant to keep indoors because you don't have rainfall. So here, on the other hand, unlike this leaf, these are anthuriums. This is one called Warockianum. And this is a magnificent leaf for not only its veining and its elongated shape, but it's durable. And it's so durable that these are the types of plants I prefer to grow and hybridize because this has a much easier time living indoors. So this plant here is a plant that originally derives from Tim Anderson, a neighbor and a colleague and a mentor. This plant here has these elongated veins without much crossing. And this plant is interesting because for years having it here and not doing anything commercially, I had grown this plant and I referred to it as Anthurium Tim Anderson stripes. It's the only way I knew to refer to it because Tim didn't share it with me with any specific name. It was a bit unusual with the markings, and so I had a tag in here that calls stripes. Interestingly, a photograph of it was posted several years ago where my tag was half submerged in the pot, and someone wrote online, "Oh, that's Tim Anderson's," and they thought it would be a Y at the end, stripey, instead of stripes. Well, it wasn't that I had bad handwriting, but it was that somebody misread the label, and there's still a misconception in a name that Tim would have given a name that to me sounds pretty silly, and I'm sure it would have to him too, stripey. Instead, my own children, when they saw this one, they said, "Oh, Dad, look, that's like the Spider-Man emblem." And Spider-Man was real big in the Marvel film industry a few years ago. We looked at it, and because I had cultivated the leaf to come out dark, when its new emerging leaf comes out, it's a deep dark brown, almost black. So instead of Spider-Man, we called it Black Widow, and that's what name it is now in the trade. But this is an interesting plant. The provenance is something that everyone generally is not going on expeditions to the jungles of South America to acquire plants. So the names are important, the provenance is important with plants, but so is breeding with them to create them into something new and improved. And in that case, I think that the breeding of velvet-leafed anthuriums is something I'm proud to have my name associated with. Yeah, this is Delta Force. This is not my hybrid. This plant here is a hybrid by another neighbor, Steve Knock. Nice. Steve passed away years ago. His widow, Marie, is still alive, and their careers and their lives were based around tropical foliage. So Marie traded this plant with me as one of the first few divisions of that plant. And again, the name for this is Delta Force. You see the real wide sinus and how it splays out like that. So hence the Delta, 3 sides. And people who know Delta Force from military terms would know that that's a name that is kind of easy and cool to remember. So a beautiful plant. Here's the flower. And what you may notice if you're a keen observer of anthuriums is this flower, if you've ever tried to grow with it, produces relatively few seeds. They're all very large. And yet this plant is slow to develop those seeds. And it was too slow for me to want to do anything with propagating. And also the genetics of the parents that led to this, even though the parents are known, again, must have been very recessive genes that turned out this particular combination, because as many times as Steve Knock tried after, he wasn't able to duplicate what came out of this particular cross, all to his credit. And there was a beautiful write-up in the Aeroid Society's newsletters and publications about him upon his passing a few years ago. So these are other examples of velvet-leafed anthuriums that have variable veining but are notable for their fused sinus, the area on top which actually is all connected. Quite beautiful for Gettyi peltata. And so these are different examples of not only a species that has that, but also collectors like to sometimes find that in things that they breed and regard that as unique and beautiful. So what you're looking at now is an anthurium flower. The flowers of anthuriums are fascinating because they go through different stages of development. The flower first exudes a little sticky substance along it that is the female receptive stage. And that little sticky area of liquid that you'll see when the female is receptive is meant to engage pollen from a male flower. But here's the trick. All flowers of velvet-leafed anthuriums, the flower that is female, after it finishes its receptive stage, will then turn male and start to release pollen. So the same flower is never going to be able to pollinate itself unless someone brushes off the pollen and stores it and comes back sometimes a few days or weeks later to pollinate. So why am I bringing up about the shape of these flowers? Partly because I've just discovered something when talking about getting my plants into Asia, and that's Chinese. In Chinese, there is no such word as anthurium. However, if you look closely at that flower now for its shape, you'll understand why in Chinese, in a traditional sense, they call this the candle flower. So this specimen plant is a breeding plant. I've had it for decades. I've held on to it, and I like it because it's particularly red when the new leaf comes out, and the flower is also red, of course. This is one that was just formally released on an Instagram post yesterday, which is called Doc Block Red Crystal. Now, red crystals are very spiritual, and yet when this plant shows its new leaf, it's decidedly primary red for a color. And this is where this plant leads to the genetics in other plants that I've grown where red was important. It also leaves a little telltale red eye right where the petiole emerges, even as the leaf matures. And these are all signs of a healthy plant, and the red color is what's most distinguished through that. It is a type of crystallinum, and hence the name red crystal. And I've done many other crosses between this and using this with different forms of Anthurium magnificum. There's one last point I'll bring up for this. If you look very carefully at the vein pattern, let's say this first leaf here, and you look at it horizontally, can you see it from holding there a moment, the way the central line there is horizontal?
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to show you another plant right now after to look at it and remember that this almost forms a T, straight up and across. So we're going to cut to another plant picture now of an elongated Michelle. But if you look closely, there's no line that way. Instead of forming a T, you'll see it comes up and there's an X shape here.
Oh.
This is much more typical of the magnificum line, and combining the two sometimes can produce variations of either. But when I look back at my lineage, I realize that that X shape comes from the purples and the Michelles, while the T shape on the veins comes from the dock block red crystal. And those two differences in terms of the plants that they largely derive from, I think are things that most growers would do well to learn about the pattern of veins on these plants. This is actually right now, it's just elongated Michelle number 20.
Okay. But we don't know the final name yet.
No, it won't be elongated Michelle, but for any people who were to want to find this plant in the genes, you'd look on our name tags for the number 20. That's why I number plants, because some of them can be similar, but over years you'll find some numbers that I've retired and others that I currently maintain. In the proper light, this is almost black. And again, I don't know if with all the shimmering of the velvety texture, if it's seen that way.
Yeah.
But the red component here is when I took an anthurium that's an Amy Donovan hybrid, and many years later, this round form was identified as not being the same as Ace of Spades, but from the original same hybridizer. And in this case, I bred some Michelle into it and came out with some color here in the remaining petiole. So for dark, round, velvety, and with a splash of color right there, I like this one. We don't have an official name for it yet, but stay tuned.
DocBlock has new videos on his YouTube channel, Anthurium Affairs, on how to successfully grow anthuriums, which should be helpful for most of you.
All right, thank you so much for your time today. Now, you have something to share with the audience before we let you go.
Well, you know, this is where I raise plants, and as any breeder would do, you make selections year to year to continue certain genetic lines of plants and to discontinue others. So I actually have a collection of nearly 50 recently retired breeding plants, and they're taking up a lot of space. I'd like to find suitable homes for them anywhere in the world.
These retired parents will be sold through an auction event, which will be announced on DocBlock's socials, so you may consider giving it a follow. Now, DocBlock's Anthurium breeding facility is quite small, which left me puzzled about how he scales up production to meet retail demand. He explained that he does not sell plants directly. Instead, he works with a few select distribution partners who receive the seed hybrids and clones to propagate and bring to market. These distributors then pay a royalty for each plant sold. To address some comments from the previous episode questioning his distribution strategy, DocBlock clarified that he does not control the quantity or price of the anthuriums sold. Should you wish to make a purchase, you can only do so through one of his distributors. Finally, watching all the way to the very end is more than I can ask of most of you, but if you have the means to support the channel financially, about the cost of a cup of coffee per month, you might consider joining as a YouTube member. Simply open any OnlyPlants episode on a desktop, and next to the channel icon you'll find a join button. You can also join my Patreon at patreon.com/SeanFromOnlyPlants. Thank you, and I will see you next week.